Welcome back to SOD TV's daily Warcraft logs update video. Today's leaderboard shows some significant movement, so let's dive right into it. Holding strong at 1 for 4 consecutive days is our Druid from Crusader Strike US, part of the ALL and PALS Guild, with a DPS of 902.7. In second place, we have Ebb and Flow, also from Crusader Strike US, with a DPS of 872.4. Rounding out the top 3 is FPS from Living Flame EU with a DPS of 867.1. Now, let's quickly acknowledge the rest of the top 10: Rethu Duju, Shart Quifa, Katsi, Garlic Soap, AI Gui Jiao Di, Shwidie, and Stickman. In today's Feral Druid leaderboard, we've got BGT from Beef Bar holding the top spot for the 4th day in a row with a DPS of 1395.1. Close behind is Pass Police from Silver Saga continues with a DPS of 1365.6, and Lawsuit, also from Silver Saga, continues with a DPS of 1310.0. These three continue to dominate the field in the Living Flame EU server. Let's not forget the rest of our top 10 Talon: Cyril, Lilclaws, Weao, Boycat, Xiao, Xiao, and Sionsu. Next, we're focusing on the top 3 Guardian Druids. Holding the 1 spot for 11 consecutive days is Jaini from Crusader Strike US, part of the Get Carried Guild, boasting a DPS of 805.0. In second place, we have Sudopjet from Living Flame EU in the Silver Saga Continues Guild with a DPS of 691.2. Rounding out the top 3 is Arzerx from Lone Wolf EU with a DPS of 691.0. Let's not forget the remaining top 10 Shilondril, Optimalgor, Breakcore, Kamikaze Kong, Emsbury, Busset, and Kariba. The top 3 melee hunters remain unchanged. Orgi from Living Flame EU continues to dominate with a DPS of 1489.4, holding the top spot for 4 consecutive days. Tree Ranger from Living Flame US follows closely with a DPS of 1474.5. Hornshot from Living Flame EU rounds out the top 3 with a DPS of 1460.5. In the remaining top 10, we have Tenok Toot, Waffle Freeze, Zatara, Bojiang Daichong Wu, Yav Fuxlu, and Alphadin. Let's dive into the top 3 ranged hunters in the Season of Discovery. Holding strong at 1 for 5 consecutive days is Fate from Living Flame EU Guild Headhunter with a DPS of 1158.0. Close behind it too is Mike from Crusader Strike US Guild Yapplebees with a DPS of 1151.5. Rounding out the top 3 is Kopromisi from Living Flame EU Guild Sepon Kalasura with a DPS of 1132.2. Kudos to these players for their impressive stats and achievements. And let's not forget the rest of the top 10: Murith, Bumrush, Sagi, Disio Fragmaster, Multigummies, and Era Sparks. Today's top 3 Arcane Mages remain unchanged. Cuties from Living Flame EU holds the 1 spot for the 2nd day with a DPS of 649.3. In second place, we have Mahuxo from Crusader Strike US with a DPS of 594.7. Rounding out the top 3 is Muju from Gulang TW in the Guild Duye Plus with a DPS of 593.5. A quick shout out to the rest of our top 10 greats: Digidu, Iluriel, Enhancement Shaman, Sorkringe, and Nicolasmage. Today's top 3 Fire Mages remain unchanged. Delano from Crusader Strike US in the Guild Pass holds the top spot for the 5th day running with a DPS of 1112.1. Soja from Living Flame US in the Guild Press W stays at 2nd place with a DPS of 1073.5, and Noel Rule from Living Flame EU in the Guild, none of the above, remains in 3rd with a DPS of 1059.4. Our remaining top 10 for today are Walter Frosch, Galander, Hookadrifa, Puff8 Megakek, Silvership, and Hyperactive. Holding steady at number 1 for Frost Mage is Peter Lidrug from Living Flame EU, maintaining a DPS of 930.8 for the 2nd day in a row. In second place, we have Exarg from Lone Wolf US with a DPS of 917.4, and Nojor Johnson from Crusader Strike US remains in 3rd with a DPS of 914.2. Congratulations to our top 3 Frost Mages. Quick shout out to the rest of today's top 10: TDMZ, Guti Blaster, Woke Yi Nai, Black Saint, Balasto, Satika, and Astronomical. Fought from Shengming Lai Yan TW remains the top protection paladin for the 3rd day running, boasting a DPS of 1086.8. In second place, we have Farvel from Living Flame EU with a DPS of 1027.9, and he Meisi C from Shengming Lai Yan TW holds the third spot with a DPS of 1009.2. The remaining top 10 are Maglish, Perf, One Punch, Juju, Visor, Bunbun, and Mutua. Holding strong at 1 for 3 consecutive days is Marchia from Wild Growth EU, Guild Dragonslayers, boasting a DPS of 1219.3. In second place, we have Tech Deck from Crusader Strike US, Guild Get Carried, with a DPS of 1178.2. Rounding out the top 3 is El Chapo from Living Flame US, Guild Cartel, with a DPS of 1176.1. A quick shout out to the rest of today's top 10: Gypsarella, Butarizard, Yidra, Muse, Garistan, Buliang Yan, and Ichthorpala. Today we're focusing on the top 3 Shadow Priests. Holding the one spot for another day is Kasupu from God on New Day KR in the Guild Ground, boasting a DPS of 820.3. In second place, we have Marzald from Crusader Strike US in the Guild Onslaught with a DPS of 804.4. Rounding out the top 3 is Zhanguluju from Shengming Lai Yan TW in the Guild Pa Kiai Wei Kiyun Play with a DPS of 799.1. Our remaining top 10 for today are Blacklisted Q, Scary Ghost, Tisunia, CIB, Sweaty Flaps, Jishi Shishi, and Kawe. Today's top 3 DPS rogues remain unchanged. Ajnan from Living Flame US in the Guild Cartel holds the one spot with a DPS of 1398.1. maintaining this position for 2 consecutive days. Sil from Living Flame EU in the Guild Dendansky Madoid is close behind at 2 with a DPS of 1377.9. Rounding out the top 3 is Mighty from Living Flame EU in the Guild Summers with a DPS of 1367.1. The remaining top 10 are Mezug, Umarin, Dabai Tunai Tang, Minimuisa, Yams, Enfi, and Syro. The top 3 tank rogues remain unchanged. Hakwin from Wild Growth EU in Nussbaum Guild holds the top spot for another day with a DPS of 932.2. Sketcher from Crusader Strike US in We the Ops Guild is close behind at 916.6 DPS. Third place goes to Zhengji Jinke from Gulang TW with a DPS of 804.1. In the rest of the top 10 we have Kusa, Nerf Assassin, Lesrance, Nova, Sion, Watchamp, and Zombie. Let's dive into the Elemental Shaman leaderboard. Holding the top spot for 5 days running is Rumbles from Wild Growth EU in the Guild Last Chance, boasting a DPS of 867.8. Close behind in second is Fae Diansei from Shengming Lai Yan TW in the Guild Fenyig Xingji with a DPS of 862.0. Rounding out the top 3 is Q Plus from Living Flame EU with a DPS of 803.2. As for the rest of the top 10, we have Bandages, Sap, Mao Zhutu, Shamandani, Kerbabing, Fryer, and Gag. Today's top 3 Enhancement Shamans remain unchanged. Nay from Living Flame EU in the Guild Dendansky Method holds the top spot with a DPS of 1403.0. This is the second day in a row for NA showing his consistent performance. In second place, we have Balgundal from God on Noob Day KR in the Guild Ground with a DPS of 1386.3, and rounding off the top 3 is Cryptenhance from Crusader Strike US in the Guild Exhausted with a DPS of 1346.2. The remaining top 10 are SFNS, Sunasham, Irvienij Tapped, Sunny AC, Mahattu, and Ayapatesham. Next are the Tank Shaman players. Holding strong at 1 is Nightsong from Living Flame EU in the Guild Summers, boasting a DPS of 931.3 for 2 consecutive days. In second place, we have Shamrid from Lone Wolf US in the Guild Bread Inc. with a DPS of 661.1. And rounding out our top 3 is Salfer from Crusader Strike US in the Guild New York City with a DPS of 653.5. A quick shout out to the remaining top 10 players Bam Zagom, Nimortoyboy Ja, Com, Shanti Googlop, and Emil Stabil. Today's top 3 DPS Warlock players are Taco from Shadowstrike AU with a DPS of 1126.3, Strawberry from Living Flame EU with a DPS of 1097.4, and Pitchipopo from Lone Wolf EU with a DPS of 1066.0. Taco has held the 1 position for 2 consecutive days now, a notable achievement in this competitive field. The remaining players in the top 10 are Versa Matre Slurpdapat Buzzle, Jusamlok, B-Rang Wo Alay Ren, and B-Rang Wo La Tang. In the Tank Warlock category, Enigmzex from Living Flame EU Guild Pepperdant retains the top spot with a DPS of 1006.9, holding this position for 2 consecutive days now. In second place, we have Dinosaur from Wild Growth US Guild Golden Girls with a DPS of 888.7. Breaking into the top 3 today is Flogo from Shadowstrike AU Guild Constriction, boasting a DPS of 857.6. The rest of the top 10 are Krell, T, Lobster, Vervain, Julipina, Inida Booster, and Proxor. In the DPS Warrior category of Season of Discovery, Arlondo from Crusader Strike US, Guild AHL, and PALS continues to reign supreme with a DPS of 1,678.2, holding this position for 2 consecutive days now. Close behind, Tuaraki from the same server, Guild Exhausted, holds second place with a DPS of 1,549.8. Rounding out the top 3 is Duki, also from Crusader Strike and Guild Exhausted, with a DPS of 1,505.2. The remaining top 10 warriors are Reza, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Freds, MFX, Atosmos, Pimosis, and Snacks. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video to see who will reign supreme this phase. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more daily content like this. Thank you all for watching.